So, I just started watching Euphoria, and my first thought was, how have I slept on this show for like 2 years? This show is so absolutely amazing. I saw the trailers for the show when it first came out, and I just saw it, and I was kind of like, yo, this looks like just a vibe. Like, this is not like interesting at all. This looks like moody Gen Z shit with a bunch of aesthetic going on, just dripping with color. I don't even know what the show is, but then I actually like watched it, and I gotta say, whoever makes those trailers, Warner Brothers, you need to fire them because they're not doing the show any favors with those trailers that they're making. Like, how about instead you just fire them and hire me? I'll cut your trailers for you. I'll be all Gen Z, you know, no cap, slat. I'll walk in there and edit your trailers for you. Give me a job, yo. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Euphoria, and we're here to talk about what makes it such a great show and why it matters and why you should watch it, honestly, if you're not watching it. But if you're not watching it, just so you know, spoilers ahead, this is for people who have seen it. But if you aren't intending to watch it and you're okay with a couple spoilers, then like go ahead and watch this. I'm not gonna spoil the whole thing, but you know, just watch the show. It's absolutely worth it. And let me tell you why. But first, make sure to like and subscribe. I mean, you don't have to do it right now. This is just your reminder to do it because I don't want to be annoying and like tell people to like and subscribe all the time. It's annoying, gets in the way of the videos like this, but it's important, so please do it. Thank you. So there's a lot that I have to say about this show. I mean, this show is just dripping with style, and not like a moody Gen Z style like I thought it would be, like I said from the trailers. More like it's got style in the same way that the movie Dope has style. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this show is kind of like if Dope and Malcolm in the Middle had a baby, and then somewhere else, the movie Trainspotting went on a date with Game of Thrones, and then they had a one-night stand, and then they had a baby, and then by some miracle, those two babies met, and the offspring that those two babies would then birth would be Euphoria. It's got complexity, it's got style, it's got really heavy themes and like really adult shit and content that it deals with in a really sometimes charming way that's derivative of, you know, a lot of really good movies that you've probably seen.
I'm Morgan fucking Freeman, and this is the beginning of the third act.
And something that I love that it's really leaned into in season 2 has been breaking that fourth wall a lot more, and the sort of metafiction that's going on.
In fairness, I did say in the beginning I had no intentions of staying clean. But I get it. Our country's dark. And people just want to find hope. And if not in reality, then in television. Unfortunately, I'm not it.
Although I think meta is like a touchy subject nowadays, especially after Matrix Resurrections, which I did a video on. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But what I think really makes this show stand out for me, and kind of the thing that I was picking up on the most, is how it creates characters. You see, when authors or directors build a setting in a movie or a TV show, they often rely largely on the world itself or some kind of looming force inside of that world to set the conflict, right? And as a result, you know, don't need to explicate every tiny thing that motivates the characters within that world. A good-hearted person stays out of the drama in their world until the drama comes to their front steps and kills their aunt or threatens their village. Then reluctantly, they need to take action and save the day. You get it, it's familiar. You don't need to know what that character ate for breakfast or why they chose to put on the outfit that they did. It's not really, any of that is like not the point, right? The point is that they were called to action, they were reluctant till it became personal, and then they faced some kind of conflict and they overcame it, and inside of that is a theme or a message. And all the characters around them, right? Like the antagonist, the foil, the love interest, the sidekick, the mentor, they all exist just to help the protagonist on their path. These archetypes exist because they're immediately recognizable characters that don't require much comprehension to understand, because you've seen them all before in some form or another. And that aids in the storytelling because people don't always have time to invest in characters in the opening act or a pilot episode of a TV series. If a show or a movie aims to be successful, it has to hook you within like the first couple minutes of the movie or the show or the first episode of the show. And for that reason, you know, it leans heavily on traditional storytelling methods. Sometimes that can be a really great thing. And sometimes it can leave fans or viewers really confused and kind of pissed off, especially if there's some kind of established lore. Good or bad, I'm not here to shit on archetypes. Archetypes are the foundation of stories. Some of my favorite movies have archetypal characters. But what I'm trying to get at is that this approach to character building can make characters that are realistic very rare because they're not real people. They're archetypes that serve the story. In our real world, nobody lives to be somebody else's sidekick because life isn't a plot-driven movie with a triumphant arc. Nobody exists to be your antagonist, for example, right? Like think of your worst enemy. In their world, they're the good guy. There's no chosen one that everyone is waiting to come save them. In real life, we are all the main characters in our own stories, which is something that Euphoria understands and takes the time to build in. No character in this show is just one archetype. I mean, sure, maybe some characters at the beginning sort of like fall into cliches when you start season 1, but every episode at some point fleshes out one character or another's backstory. And eventually every single character that has more than like a sentence of dialogue is given a complex backstory that makes them feel like a real, actual person and not just simply an archetype. Like coming into this, I thought this show was just going to be about Zendaya, I don't know how to pronounce her name. I thought it was going to be about Zendaya's character Rue, but it's not. It's actually about everybody, and she's just the observer through which their stories get told. She's the narrator. All the characters intersect and weave together like a fabric, and at first you think, oh, like this is the asshole jock, or like this is the shy virgin person. And right when you're thinking, I hate that character, or I feel bad for that character, they get their own episode, and you're like, wow, you know, good or bad, whether I agree with them or not, I fully understand why this character is the way that they are. And maybe it's not even their fault that they are the way that they are, but there's consequences to that nonetheless. In fact, in the opening scene of the first episode, Rue actually kind of sets this up in one of her first lines.
I didn't build this system, nor did I fuck it up.
Every character in the show is made into a person and intricately weaved into the larger, more intricate story where those characters actually play off of each other in a really raw and refreshingly honest way. And this show succeeds in that because it spends its time with characters very wisely. To be more explicit, I did the math on the actual time that it's spent on character building. In season 1, the average prologue scene where you're given a character's backstory is only 10 minutes long. That's 15% of an episode, right? Barely feels like a minute when you actually watch it. And yet somehow, when you add it up, there's a total of 80 minutes of character exposition across the entire first season. That's longer than The Nightmare Before Christmas, an hour and 20 minutes of screen time dedicated to making the characters actual human beings. And that groundwork is necessary for establishing the tension in the way that this show uses tension, which is created by a series of misunderstandings piling up between characters, which allows the show to create huge conflict out of very simple moments of misunderstanding.
You tried to extort my son.
What?
Because of what I did to her friend.
The fuck are you talking about, man?
Let's take the scene for example, right? It's a perfect example. Out of context, this moment seems very trivial. On its own, someone who hasn't watched the show might see this and be like, oh, some asshole is on a date with one person and flirting with another, right? Or on the flip side, if you heard the dialogue that they're saying, you might think, oh, she's overreacting to like this situation. But because the show did the work to build up Kat's backstory, it has to do very little work in terms of narrative development to make this simple moment so inciting for her character. If you've watched the show, you know that as a kid, her first love was a boy named Daniel, who was sweet and kind to her. Then she went on family vacation and she got stung by a jellyfish, so she had to sit around and drink an excessive amount of virgin pina coladas, which led to weight gain, which led to that sweet boy leaving her for fucking Kendra Sutherland. I think we all know Kendra Sutherland, by the way. Like, she sucks. So now, when she's starting to find another nice guy who likes her unconditionally the way Daniel did, and she sees him talking to Kendra Sutherland years later about getting his sister to take her shift at work, she gets completely triggered. She runs off and she has sex with some other guy behind a carnival stand to get back at him, and goes completely cold on Ethan without him understanding what the fuck even happened. Because all he did was talk to his sister's coworker. But Kat's trauma caused her to snap, which leads to her character's sexual awakening, which like later turns out to kind of be a bad thing, but we're not here to talk about that. And all of this because she got stung by a goddamn jellyfish. What other show builds character like this? What other movie have you seen build character like this? If you can think of one, please leave it in the comments because I'd love to cover that. But I digress. This show is built on this kind of dramatic tension. Characters built on trauma and misunderstandings between those characters because of that trauma. And sure, it's not the only kind of conflict that happens in the show, but it's kind of like the main source of tension that drives the show forward. It's character driven. I think that word gets misused a lot of the time. People think, oh, it's a character driven show oftentimes when, you like the characters. No, Euphoria is like the gold standard for character driven drama series. we as the audience can justify a character's actions even if we don't morally agree with them. We oftentimes have sympathy for them, in fact, in those moments because we know and understand characters completely. But the tragedy of this show is that no character truly understands another or what they've even been through. Only our narrator, Rue, who gives us all this character exposition, but it's almost given in a very after the fact kind of way. Like she didn't know this kind of information about the people in her world when she was interacting with them. Which is a great segue into, the part of the video that I always make, right? Why does this show matter? Euphoria matters because in our lives, we are the main characters, but this show demonstrates that other people are the main characters in their own traumatic stories and reveals to us that other people's shit is not more or less valid than whatever you've experienced. Through the eyes of a teen drug addict, we uncover what makes each character unique, what their traumas are, what their insecurities are. Trauma affects every single one of them in a different way, but it always has a devastating consequence. Whether it's seeing your father die because of cancer right in front of you and taking his medicine to cope, or being committed and abandoned by your mother for being transgender, or being stung by a jellyfish on vacation. Everyone's trauma is unique, but equally valid in how it affects their relationships and abilities to communicate with other people. Nobody in this show is on the same page, since who they are is not defined by the setting that they're in or some ulterior force, but by the broken path that led them to where they are. They all have dealt with complex shit that makes them complex people, and this show is so beautiful in how it paints that and pens these characters to create a world that blends and clashes these cacophonous personalities in this imperfect fresco that just feels so true to life. Because every person you've ever experienced in your life, every person you've ever met or seen, like they could have been in this show and they are living their own show. They're living their own lives. They're living their own stories. They're dealing with their own trauma in their own ways. This show could have been about you. It could have been about your dad. It could have been about your partner, your friend, your worst enemy, your cousin, the delivery driver that drops off your Amazon packages, or the fucking sandwich artist at Subway. They all have dealt with complex shit that makes them a complex person, and this show just nails that. It's made me rethink the way that I want to interact with the people that I see every single day, whether I know them or not. I think to myself, how much shit has this person been through and how much have they overcome? And, it's made me rethink the way that I want to treat people. And I think that's a really powerful thing for a show to do. And hopefully if you're watching this show, you get the same thing out of it. And if you're not watching this show, I hope you watch it. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I'm gonna do another episode soon. Not quite sure what I'm gonna do it on. I got a couple of ideas. I'm thinking Ferris Bueller, maybe the movie Dope that I referenced at the beginning. So if you got a preference, leave it in the comments, let me know. And if it's something else entirely, let me know about that. I was also thinking about doing Planet of the Apes. That's like a very daunting task. Anyway, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.